Hey, what is up, everybody? It's your boy Nerdican. I am back on the regular schedule. I want to do this video about the Snowpacalypse. One of my favorite channels, VinWiki. VinWiki is a guy who had a luxury exotic car rental, and then he got into selling them, which is a crazy business. When you're watching his videos, the craziness that I dealt with the craziness of poor people. I dealt with crazy people asking crazy things, wanting crazy prices on cars that they did not have the credit or the down payment to get. He has a different type of crazy. He has very wealthy crazy. Go check out his video. He did one on the Snowpacalypse, and the Snowpacalypse was in Atlanta in 2014 in I think it was late January or early February. Atlanta, as you know, is not prepared for snow. We are not prepared for things like that. Well, we got a hard blizzard. We got a type of blizzard which is your average blizzard for a place like Buffalo, New York. The difference being, we're not used to that. We don't have the equipment. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have snowplows. We don't have vehicles to salt the roads. We don't have, and then when you go a little further into the people driving on those roads, they generally aren't used to that stuff. So what we had was a situation, we knew it was coming, but nobody really, we all just kind of like shrugged our shoulders and looked at each other like, well, I don't know what we do. What do we do? Just go home, right? We did the normal thing. Everybody goes to the grocery store and like wipes out toilet paper, milk, and bread. They just have like I don't know, people are making like French toast. But yeah, people go to the grocery stores and just wipe those things out. My mom called from a different state. She was in North Carolina. She called me to make sure I went and got toilet paper, milk, and bread. I'm like, I'm fine. Don't worry about it. So that was the situation. Nobody really knew what was going on. Then it hit. It started at about 3 p.m. Actually, probably a little earlier than that. And it just kept getting colder and colder and snowier, and the roads iced, and it just got worse and worse. So by the time school was letting out, elementary schools and high schools, nobody could get on the roads. The roads were done. The roads were frozen. We don't have snowplows. We don't have salt machines. So the roads looked absolutely the roads looked like a scene from The Walking Dead. Like, everybody was trying to get out of town because the dead were rising and biting people. And there were just cars abandoned. Cars that had collisions just abandoned on the side of the road. And it was like that for miles and miles. I've never seen anything like it before. Definitely in Atlanta, definitely not in the States. But people weren't really prepared for it. So people had their kids spent the night at the elementary schools. They got cots out and they got blankets out, and they spent the night at these schools overnight because it just froze. And I guess they showed movies to the kids and did what they could to keep them from panicking. But nobody could get to their kids. Nobody, even the people with all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive cars, they don't really. First off, they're not a lot of. If you have it in Atlanta, you're not used to it, so you're not used to driving on it. And then secondly, if you have it, a lot of the roads were closed down and blocked because there were just so many cars. People were getting into accidents, and the police, they call the police, and the police were saying, just go home. Just either leave your car, or if you think you can carry on, just go home, exchange information, and we'll catch up to you when we can. The police were just so overwhelmed with the situation, and that a lot of people, they really were just like, go home, just leave. I remember walking back to my apartment, and I was one of the smart people. I was like, dude, we need to get out of this. The job I was doing was logistics at the time, and we delivered chairs and we delivered linens for parties, things like that. I kept pushing, and I kind of got these scowls and these looks from my boss, but I kept telling him, so we cannot be on the roads when this happens, when this freezes. Otherwise, we're going to sleep here. We're going to live here. And finally I pushed hard enough because I kind of, because of my background driving and my background in logistics. I knew what was coming, and I knew kind of how bad it was. I didn't really know how bad it was going to be, but the factor that I didn't take into, I knew it was going to get cold, and I knew it was going to freeze. The factor I didn't take into account is that everybody in Atlanta was not going to be prepared for it, and yeah, so that's the situation we had. I got home, no problem. My sister, she lived 2.5 miles from where she lived. It took her 2 hours and 15 minutes to go 2.5 miles at, however 5 miles per hour that she was willing to go in her car. And she had an all-wheel drive car as well. But that's the situation that she had. So it was mass chaos on the thing. And let me do an edit. I got to go into this grocery store, get some groceries, but I'm going to do an edit and come back and tell you some of the crazy individual stories, okay? So I was out walking. I wanted to see the carnage that was going on. I was home and I was safe. It was about, I think the sun was still out, so it was probably about 6 or so. So I go out to the road and I'm looking at the road and it's just cars just backed up everywhere. There's a little trickle of traffic. But I came across this lady her car had spun and in the ice and it wound up in a ditch, and it was so deep in the ditch and it had such a steep angle that the back tire, the back left wheel was off the ground and the car was just sitting in this hole. And she was out. She was okay and everything was good. But she started walking, she started to walk to wherever she was going, and she must have worked in an office because she had a skirt and she had nice shoes and she had a jacket, but it wasn't really an outdoor jacket. It wasn't a heavy type of jacket. And it was a great moment of just humanity where this guy just driving by, he stopped and he pulled over and he said, he asked, "Ma'am, would you like a ride?" And she got in, and it was two people who'd never met and two strangers who would, their paths wouldn't have crossed unless this storm had kind of put them together. And he was stopping. He didn't have to add to his drive to get her to wherever she needed to. But he did, because that's Atlanta. Atlanta's a town based on hospitality. We don't build cars. We're not a banking center. We do a little bit of everything. We do a little bit of that, but we're a hospitality town for the most part. We host things, events, footballs, conventions, things like that, and that's who we are in Atlanta. And he just picked this lady up, and it was such a nice gesture. And when they drove down the road and the light changed in front of him, and he must have hit his brakes and nothing really happened and nothing really stopped, and his car did this beautiful pirouette through the intersection as other cars were crossing, and just barely missed some other cars and wound up in a ditch, just like the lady had done before. And there's nothing. I was walking. There's really nothing I could do for him. But it was just this horribly ironic moment where, this lady gets out of one car wreck to get into a car with somebody else, and then gets into another car wreck. But they both got out, and they were both fine. And I'd never seen a car pirouette through an intersection like that, just so beautifully, as I heard it skidding around and off into the next ditch. But no, they were okay. And the cool thing about the Snowpacalypse is, because the kids had to stay at the schools, now years later that we've gone on, and it's a really cool thing, because whenever we get a snow day, whenever we get the threat of snow, whenever we get the possibility of snow, the memory is fresh in people's minds. So we get that threat, that light, forecasting, and the whole city shuts down and to preemptively, because they don't want to deal with that again. And it's a really beautiful thing, because the last time it happened, it happened a couple times this past winter. The city just shut down, and everybody sort of had a free day in the middle of the week, and it didn't snow. It didn't get that bad. It was cold, but you saw people, you know, go for walks and you know, just get out and meet the neighbors, and you know, he's talking about the snowstorm. It was the thing that it's a really beautiful thing in Atlanta that kind of brings the community together. Atlanta's not the community, you know, I live in a neighborhood. I've lived in 2 neighborhoods this year. I really don't know any of my neighbors from either of the neighborhood. I know sort of about them, but the snow days are sort of what brings everybody together now, you know. But I remember the day after the snowpocalypse. I went out in the morning, and it was just beautiful. It was quiet. The whole city was quiet. Everybody was sleeping in, you know, and just everybody had gotten to where they needed to get to. And I went out in the parking lot of the apartment complex, and on the other side of the parking lot was a buck. And if you know anything, it was a buck deer. If you know anything about deer, the buck is rarely seen. The buck will have his harem, his women, his lady deer, and at the herd, and he's nearby to defend his herd, but he's never really out amongst them. He's off in the tree line. He's, you know, keeping an eye on everything out there. But the buck was across the parking lot, and he's had this beautiful set of horns, and he's looking at me, and you know, I'm looking at him, and we have this beautiful moment where, you know, I kind of like realized, yeah, it was a crappy situation and I'm cold, but this creature just lived outside through that. And here he is standing there, and he looked at me, and he kind of like looked deep into me, and he raised his hoof, and I thought he was going to take a step towards me, and he turned, and his other 3 hooves went right out from under him because he was standing on ice, and he busted his ass on the ice pretty hard. And I was sitting there like, oh! I watched it, and he stood up, and he stood up like somebody had, you know, like a person who trips in the middle of the street, and they just play it off. He stood up and he just played it off like I had never seen it, and he got to keep his majestic facade as he just busted his ass on the ice. And I laughed. It was a belly laugh. I laughed so hard that my feet came out from under me, and I busted my ass on the sidewalk. And yeah, that was our beautiful moment. That was ruined by our clumsiness. But you know, that happened, and it went away, and it got predicted again. 3 days later, they said, okay, it's going to happen again. We're going to get another polar vortex. And me, I'm not the person to, you know, I like to make the most of situations. That's how I live my life. And that's how I got to do so many crazy things in my life. I like to make the most of the situation. So I knew another freeze was coming. And I called up my friend Phoenix down in Florida. I said, hey, I'm going to do like a budget trip to Disney. Do you want to come with me? And she said, yeah. She lives driving distance from Disney World. So, you know, Atlanta was going to freeze again. I grabbed the smallest rental car that I could, and I just, in between the freezes, when it was thawed out, I left town, and I had a great time. Phoenix and I had a great time down at Disney World, and it was the first time I'd ever, because Phoenix she's in a wheelchair. I don't know what's physically wrong with her. I've never asked. I've known her for a decade. I've never really asked why she's in that wheelchair, but I know mentally what's wrong with her. She likes to hang out with crazy people, which is why she hung out with me in the first place, and we got to become friends. But it's the first time I'd ever been to a Disney World with somebody with a disability, and it was kind of cool. You do get in rides a lot faster. There were times where, and it's a really neat thing. There were times where I had to, like Peter Pan's flight, I had to pick her up out of her chair and carry her onto the conveyor belt and get her into the boat. And if you know Peter Pan is suspended from above. So carrying a 110-pound person on a moving conveyor belt, stepping onto something that isn't exactly stable, something that gimbals from the top, is quite an experience as well. And which I'll probably do a Disney Stories video as well with that. But yeah, that was a great time. We had a great time, and that's how I escaped Snowpacalypse 2. So other people have stories of Snowpacalypse 2, but I don't, because I went to Disney and I had a great time. But thanks for listening, you guys. Hit a like, hit a subscribe, and y'all go have a good day. And stay inside if it snows. Stay inside. Bye.